Hi, my name is Dr. Tiffany Anderson. I'm an assistant professor of English at Youngstown State University as well as the director of Africana Studies. I am so honored and pleased that Dr. Graber would ask me to contribute to her interesting panel about trauma in young adult literature and teaching trauma in young adult classrooms. So my entry point for this small talk will be something that I discuss in my classroom, my undergraduate classroom. I teach a poem by Paul Laurence Dunbar called Sympathy, and strangely, it is a really popular poem without people knowing that that is the poem that they are quoting or referencing when they're using the language in it. So the poem begins, the first line is, "I know what the caged bird feels, alas." The second stanza begins with, "I know why the caged bird beats his wing." The third stanza begins with, "I know why the caged bird sings." And of course, that line is then taken and used in Maya Angelou's memoirs, and she also writes poetry about a caged bird. And in this situation, the caged bird is representative of Black people enslaved in the American institution of slavery. Paul Laurence Dunbar is claiming that he understands what these Black slaves have been through, perhaps specifically his ancestors have been through. And we know this because he titles the poem Sympathy. It's not titled Why the Caged Bird Sings or Caged Bird or whatever. It's titled Sympathy. So he's specifically making this connection of emotional understanding of what these slaves went through. So when we're talking about this in my class, I introduce the notion of generational post-traumatic stress disorder. I first came across this idea 10 years ago at a conference. Dr. Bobo, the keynote speaker, was saying that she has been petitioning to change the definition of post-traumatic stress disorder to include generational post-traumatic stress disorder. Already, our understanding of post-traumatic stress disorder is that the trauma must occur to the individual and they must experience in order for the post-traumatic stress disorder to exist. But her notion was that specifically with American Indians, there is such a thing as generational post-traumatic stress disorder. In other words, the suicide and alcoholism that exists within American Indian communities is directly related to the fact that they are survivors of a very large genocide. And so with that in mind, we can consider the same of Black people in America, that we suffer from generational post-traumatic stress disorder as it relates to American institution of slavery. I specifically identify as such. And because I feel very strongly about that, I developed a friendship with a woman who also feels like she experiences generational post-traumatic stress disorder as a Jewish woman. However, her situation was very interesting. She told me one day, "Tiffany, I have had dreams of the Holocaust when I was a child before I knew what the Holocaust was," which was surprising. But a couple of years after she shared this with me, I was reading a scientific article in which scientists have found that when trauma happens to an individual, it actually codes itself into the individual's DNA. In other words, her ancestors who survived the Holocaust, the experience of the Holocaust was coded into their DNA. My ancestors, the slavery and the trauma of the lynchings thereafter and the trauma of the civil rights, all was coded into my ancestors' DNA. And just the same as my smile or my nose or the texture of my hair has been passed down generationally inside of the DNA of my ancestors, also the trauma of their experiences is a part of me just as well. And so this is the basis of this connection between generational post-traumatic stress disorder and this new finding of trauma coded in DNA. For the English Festival, we have two books that I am excited about presenting this notion to our students at the YSU English Festival. The first is Chains by Laurie Halse Anderson, and the other is The River and the Rock by Kekla Magoon. And I'm interested in connecting this moment in slavery to this moment of the civil rights era of the 50s and 60s, because imagine those boys, the protagonists of the story, are carrying the trauma of the other book that we're experiencing. So I want to thank you for listening to me. I hope that it connects well to your understanding of trauma in the classroom, and I'm just honored. Thank you so much. Have a great conference.